The future is no longer so far away. Your identity stretches, almost like if you think of a particle and it has its world line as it goes from its birth to its death. You're starting to notice the world line of yourself. All of a sudden, that can bring this feeling of, oh, I get it. This whole thing is me. And if this whole thing is me, then my stories about what I need to do to feel loved, those stories are often false. Like, I have all this time. I don't have to be everything all at once. Like, it counts that in a year I'll be able to master my anger, right? It counts that a year ago I was able to master my pettiness or whatever it is. Like, all of a sudden you're extended. So you have a lot more chances to do good in the world. You have a lot more chances to do things that you could be proud of.
Hi, everybody. Today I am excited to have a conversation with Julia Mossbridge. Warm welcome to Mind the Shift, Julia.
Thank you. So glad to be here. What an interesting show.
Yes, I have, as I said before the interview here, I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time. And I'm so happy we could finally make this happen. I've been following you for some time on social media, primarily LinkedIn. I think you're most active there, or maybe you're active on other social media as well. But I mean, just 5 minutes before this interview, I noticed that you had posted something there on LinkedIn that I was very interested in. So I took note of that. And
what was that? Do you remember? Because I posted a couple of things today.
Yeah, it was a Scientific American article about
collaboration.
Collaboration in person is better than what we are doing here now.
Exactly.
It's kind of interesting. So yeah, I'll see what I'll do with that. But I've read essays by you on Medium, and I've listened to several interviews. I've seen you on Gaia TV. I've read the book that you wrote together with Teresa Chung, who's twice been on the show, actually, The Premonition Code.
Yeah.
And your work and your references give me a lot of inspiration for the work that I'm doing with an organization called Frontier Journalists Network, among other things. And that's an organization which tries to spread knowledge about the research that is being done at the intersection between science and spirituality.
Yeah.
So you are a cognitive neuroscientist. Is that correct to say?
You know what? I don't know what's correct to say. My training is in neuroscience for my master's at UC San Francisco, and then at Northwestern I did psychoacoustics, psychology of sound perception, perceptual learning, trying to understand how the mind learns in the perceptual world. And then as a postdoc at Northwestern, I did heavy cognitive neuroscience. So my most recent training is in cognitive neuroscience, but then I went and did a bunch of experimental psychology work. So then I have hands-on training with experimental psychology, and then I started doing technology, creating applications and technology, AI, that can support human potential.
Yeah, it's really broad. It's really wide spectrum. So, and you are associated with so many universities. You mentioned Northwestern University and UC San Francisco, UC San Diego, and you're an affiliate of IONS as well, Institute of Noetic Sciences, and you have founded institutes of your own, at least 2, as far as I know.
Yes, true. But let's update that. I'm no longer officially affiliated with Northwestern. Okay. I still have friends there and still talk with people and collaborate when it's interesting at Northwestern. I'm at University of San Diego, which is different from UC San Diego. And that's an honorary appointment. So that's an unpaid, but like you get to use the library sort of appointment and collaborate there. And then I'm no longer affiliated with IONS, but I'm a fan of ION. I created the Mossbridge Institute, which is a for-profit consulting group around transformational discovery management. So when there are technologies that are transformational, how do you manage that? is the question there. And then the nonprofit Tilt, the Institute for Love and Time, that's about creating technologies that support well-being related to feeling unconditional love and the healing power of unconditional love woven through.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that. So what I want to say about with this, I mean, mentioning all these universities and all that, is that, I mean, you seem to be connected with quite a few places within academia, and you still seem so incredibly independent and free thinking. And that's not always the case with people who are affiliated with so many, standard academic institutions. So how do you achieve that? Who are you in this matrix?
I love that question. It is just, I don't know if it's a how, it's sort of a is. Like, it's my nature, and for better or worse, frankly. I mean, I think it's my nature to not be afraid of my own mind and the ideas that I find interesting and want to pursue them. And when I say for better or worse, I really mean it. Like, what that means is, do I have a stable job? No. Right? Right? Like, so do I get concerned about money and what's going to happen next? Yes. But I was also born into a family where everyone did their own thing. So, my dad was a physicist who decided to leave the sort of academic world of physics because it wasn't working for him, and developed his own consulting company doing reliability engineering. My mom created her own private practice in therapy. My sister became an artist, and so I was not raised in a world in which the idea was that you find a company or an organization and you do what it says and then you move along your path. Plus, I was born with this fearlessness that I know is genetic, because when I go to our family reunions, everyone's kind of like, la la, what are you doing? Oh, that's great, la la la.
Okay, so it runs in the family then.
Yeah. And so I feel like not everyone needs to be this way. And in fact, the world would be a disaster if everyone was this way. But those of us who are doing exploring on the edges, it's very helpful to be this way, because people give their ideas or opinions about what you're doing, and you just say, oh, okay, that's your idea or opinion, but it doesn't change your drive to go investigate something. And that's what's needed, is this fearlessness around, like, well, I really find this interesting. It really seems like there's something to it. I'm just going to keep going. And that's valuable for that, and probably for that only.
Yeah, but you seem to be able to accommodate both worlds, so to speak. I mean, the free-thinking, independent world, the fringe world, if you will, and the standard mainstream academic world. You don't seem to, or did you have problems working at these universities because they were too stiff or strict or hierarchical or something?
I had no, I really enjoyed the people that I worked with. I'm very good at selecting people who I think will be able to deal with and support my independence. But that selection narrows things down. And so I had problems staying at those institutions. So when I went through my postdoc and then became an affiliated professor, et cetera, but I could never really go on the tenure track. And I was literally told, you're going to have to drop all this woo-woo stuff, because I do have these skills in mainstream science. It's not that I'm not useful. It's not that I can't think. It's not that I can't be innovative in mainstream science. It's just that that's not where my mind takes me. And so I can talk to people who are never going to believe in precognition, or never going to believe in the way unconditional love can support human potential, or never going to believe in time travel, right? I can talk to those people just fine, because we're going to get along with trying to understand the nature of the universe, which is what I'm really about, right? I'm not really, really sure of my own ideas, right? And that helps. It's just that I won't be able to stay there long and do what I need to do.
Mm. Yeah, but it's a wonderful thing to be able to stay in both worlds and to know the drill in the mainstream, so to speak, and even among physicalists. It resonates with me, but I quit my steady job at a mainstream newspaper, much because I thought it was a bit too strict, and I wasn't free enough. But I think it's wonderful that you can combine these two worlds as you explain here.
Well,
So
the only part of just to be clear, the only part of the worlds that I can combine are the parts where people are actually looking for the truth of the answer. Like there are people who basically have their bets placed on a physicalist worldview, and there are people who have their bets placed on maybe consciousness as fundamental worldview, or an idealist, or some kind of monist worldview. But those are their bets. They're not living by them as their dogma. And so that's largely, good scientists don't have dogma.
Yes, I agree. I mean,
right?
People are, none of us can be entirely sure of what's actually going on. So we all have our bets.
Yeah,
that's true. So anyway, let's dive a little bit more into these esoteric things. You mentioned the Institute for Love and Time, which I love. I mean, you teach about love and time, and to a layman that might sound a little bit strange. So how do those two go together, love and time? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, so one way is the sort of obvious way, they're both really powerful to human beings, right? True. They're both healers. So when people say time heals all wounds, well, unconditional love also heals all wounds, right? So they're both healers. But at a deeper level, it comes from that what I've noticed when I started training people in intuition, especially intuition about the future, intuitive foresight or precognition, or whatever you'd like to call that, the capacity to predict future events that shouldn't be predictable. What I noticed is people kept saying the more they would practice, the more they would kind of open up to this experience of unconditional love. It's almost like the boundaries in time, when they were removed these conditions on connection, so that there was this interplay. And then I started thinking, well, maybe that makes sense, because when you're learning about how to do even predictive analytics, even something very mainstream, like even with machine learning, when you're learning how to think into the future based on what you know now, you're extending your sense of self through time. And we sort of, we give lip service to our memories, and we give lip service to where we would like to be in the future. But in the physicalist world, we often just say the only thing that exists is now, because that's what we can see, right? The past has just disappeared. Like, where is it? The future, can't see it yet. So to extend yourself in time, even with your thinking, even along mainstream paths, is to start to break down boundaries. The future is no longer so far away. Your identity stretches, almost like if you think of a particle and it has its world line as it goes from its birth to its death, or from emission to absorption, let's say, of a photon. That you're starting to notice the world line of yourself. And all of a sudden and I do think it's all of a sudden, that can bring this feeling of, oh, I get it. This whole thing is me. And if this whole thing is me, then my stories about what I need to do to feel loved, I mean, it sounds like a leap, but it actually kind of just happens to people. What I need to do to be loved, those stories are often false. Like, I have all this time. I don't have to be everything all at once. Like, it counts that in a year I'll be able to master my anger, right? It counts that a year ago I was able to master my pettiness, or whatever it is. Like, all of that counts. It doesn't have to be present all at once. All of a sudden you're extended. So you have a lot more chances to do good in the world. You have a lot more chances to do things that you could be proud of and that you could feel loved for. So that's one piece of it. And then another piece of it is, on the flip side, I had the intuition that when I'm teaching people about how to do this, I talk to them about how to get into a state where their minds can actually intuitively pick out the future events and describe them. Now, how do you do that? As a scientist, many scientists do this. So you can tell from my crazy hair. I feel like you can judge from someone's crazy hair how well they do this, but it's pretty crazy. But as a scientist, it's like the future is talking to you, telling you, when you come into graduate school, there's an infinite number of experiments you can do in an area of interest because there's so many parameters that you can vary. I mean, even if you're a physical scientist, even if you're a theoretical physicist, there's an infinite number of ways to go with your dissertation, let's say. How do you narrow those down to something that's fruitful? Well, the good scientists are filtered out because they're the ones who are able to sort of, in my view, listen to the future and pull on the threads intuitively that are going to be most fruitful. And if you get a scientist in a corner and you talk to them about this and they've had a successful career, they've had some good papers or insights, they'll talk about this. Like, I don't know, I'm in the shower and then I'm like, aha, I should use this, or I should do this, right?
So would you say that good scientists are the ones that kind of experience this as, or perceive this process as insights coming to them rather than them finding the insights?
Almost always.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're not coming from the past. I sort of hypothesize that many of them come from the future, but you could still tell the same story from the past. But when they're in that state, they're not in a state of conditional love. They're not in a state of banging their head against the wall of the universe to say, show me your secrets. Like, they'll talk about how that doesn't work, right? They're in a state of unconditional love. This is the self-transcendent experience of like, I don't know what's going on, but this is beautiful and I'm awestruck by this phenomenon. I wish I could figure it out. I'm not going to go take a shower. And
then all of a sudden it just dawns on you what's going on.
It emerges when you're not trying.
Yeah.
And so it's this effortless emergence. And that is this very akin to the state of unconditional love. So I actually did some science on this because I thought, I'm enough observing this. I want to check if when people are in this state, if they actually pull information from the future more, because that's the hypothesis. So I use the standard in the non-standard world. I use the standard remote viewing paradigm, except it's precognitive in this case. So in other words, people are asked to describe a future target. The target has yet to be selected. They submit their report about their description. The target still has yet to be selected. Then a random number generator selects the target and shows it to them. And then what you do is you can get independent judges to associate the target to determine the similarity between the target and what they described. And I've done this in 2 studies. They both showed, the first study was an accident. I didn't know this was going to happen. Second study was a confirmatory study. The first study showed that people who were in a state of unconditional love, I developed a measure for unconditional love to actually like a survey to measure it. The first study showed that people who were in a state of high unconditional love were significantly more capable of getting information from the future. The second study showed the same thing. In fact, the only people who were capable of doing the task on average were the people who were in the high state of unconditional love in both studies. So it makes me think I'm onto something there.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Right? It's almost like the unconditional love allows you to not be at the egoic center of the process. So that, like the banging your head against the wall to try to get an answer in physics or any other field is like, oh, I want the answer. I'm this independent person. The answer should come to me. Blah, 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 blah. It's this egoic sort of, but just being like,
you're kind of building up resistance when you're doing that in a way.
Yeah, it's like you're saying my relationship to this problem,
and it should be in a specific way, very, very detailed, specific way. Otherwise, I'm not on board.
Right. It has to be a billboard that has all the details according to my belief of how it should be.
Yeah.
And then when people open up to this other state, it's the ego is not at the center, and the being becomes this sort of long thread through time who can receive the truth of the situation or an insight that leads towards the truth of a situation.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, this is all very, very fascinating, and I think you're onto something, definitely. But I guess some people would say, some people in the spiritual community, perhaps, for lack of a better word, would say that these people who are in the state of unconditional love, they are actually in the now, because there is only the now moment, and what you call future and past, or I don't know if you mean it by that, but talking about future and past is actually talking about something that is going on at the same time. Everything's simultaneous, and what we call future is actually potentialities in the field, or, well, you've heard about this, I guess. And because one, not evidence of this perhaps, but indication of this is that suffering, and you've probably heard that some people say that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And suffering requires time. If you think you're stuck in time, you suffer, because you kind of linger on the pain that you had once, but you keep remembering that pain. So to suffer requires that you think that you are stuck in time, especially linear time. So what would you make of what I just said here?
Well, to have pain requires time. To have any perception requires time. So let's back out of this, because I hear this a lot, and people have said to me, "Oh, you're spiritually bypassing by saying that you can contain the past and the future, and there's anything more than the now." And I say, well, I don't know if that's spiritually bypassing or not. I actually think it's spiritually bypassing to say that all there is the now, when a second ago, like, you actually believe that you existed. So it just feels, wrong. Intellectually, I'm disingenuous, because, you bet that your child existed a second ago, and you bet that your child is going to exist a second from now. So we're constructed that way. Now, we're constructed that way. That doesn't mean that we're constructed to perceive past and future as real but not present. That doesn't mean that is how it works physically. So, but then folks say, there's this story about, well, the past happened, it's gone, there's nothing you can do about it. The future is a potentiality. But you can, like, do things now to change the future. And the reason that's so enticing is because we're built to have this experience of agency. We're built to have the experience of free will. And so it's very enticing to say you can't do anything about the past. The future you can change. And if you do it right, you can weave yourself into the best potentiality. And, like, that's what we're going to make a lot of money on in the self-help book market, is how you're going to do that, how you're going to have control. And I think it's a racket. I mean, I think it's a real racket. I think it teaches people to look for control rather than responsibility, in the following way. So we all absolutely have responsibility for our actions. There's no question in my mind. Does that mean we control what we do? No. There's no evidence that we have control over what we do. Everything that we are experiencing consciously, including our conscious desires to move our hands or say these words, or for you to listen, or for you to ask a question, all of that has been figured out by our unconscious minds before we...
Yeah, it's actually been measured, hasn't it? I mean, the brain signal comes, or I don't know what order it comes, but our thought that I should do this, comes after we actually do it, or something.
After we have actually decided to do it, and sometimes everything you're consciously experiencing is after the fact, right? By definition. So when we talk about living in the now, you're talking about living in your unconscious mind, because the now, whatever you experience right now, has already happened.
Yeah,
so
that's a good one.
Yeah, so it's just like, so having said that, when I say this thing, like, there's no evidence that we have control, I'm using the word we to tap into what most people think they are, which is their conscious experience. Now, what if you re-identify yourself with all of you? Let's re-identify ourselves just as a thought experiment with our conscious minds, everything that goes on in our conscious mind, our ego, all that stuff, and our entire unconscious mind, which includes all of our body calculations and all of the decisions that are made without our awareness. What if that is we? Now, do you have free will? Not really, because you have to extend the boundary a little bit more, right? Because look what's affecting your decisions, what you had for breakfast, what you're addicted to in the outside world, your family, who have major impacts on those unconscious calculations, your friends, people you care about, whatever is going on for them. So now extend your body more, extend your world more, extend your definition of who you are more. It starts to take up a lot more space. So the Iroquois have this wonderful term called the long body. And David Mitchell at California Institute for Integral Studies recently wrote this beautiful article about the long body through space and time, and how as we extend ourselves to include our long bodies, which is not just our own bodies, but everything that influences us, our ancestors, our children, the tools we use, our cell phones, you start to become aware of the interconnectivity and the lack of free will of just this one small sliver. But even as you include the whole long body, what affects that? What affects each of those things? So you start to get to this point, if you're really going to honestly include all the things that would be necessary to say, I have control. I have control. I have free will. The I, if you extend the I to the level where it would be really accurate to say that, the I actually includes the entire universe, and not just the entire universe of the now, but the entire universe of all the past leading up to the now, and not just that, all of the future. Because guess what? There's a very low probability that if we're talking right here on Earth right now, that in 1 second we'll be talking on Mars.
Yeah.
So that tells us that
ends up being pretty grandiose, doesn't it? But
it's the opposite of grandiose. It's actually, the more you include the definition of I the less the ego,
actually more humble.
The less percentage the ego takes up in it.
Yeah.
And that's why it does not want to do that. That's why
I mean, you're talking about now both space and time here, because that's also, time is weird. We've talked about time a lot here, and then there's space. But it's not a dichotomy, because it's the same thing. I think it was Einstein who came up with this term SpaceTime. Am I right there?
Einstein,
so how would you define space-time? And
it was more like Minkowski who kind of came up with this block universe, block world thing. But based on Einstein's special theory of relativity.
Yeah, because they were talking about the ether before that as some kind of basic field, an idea which is actually having a rebound now. But I think he started talking about space-time. Anyway. So I just a question to you, because I wrote 2 essays myself. I'm just meddling with these things sometimes, and I'm not expert, but I kind of love delving into these philosophical questions. So I wrote 1 essay called "Are there even any events?" and the second one was entitled "Are there even any places?" What would be your answer to those 2 questions?
All right, let's back up a little. Let's be careful. Space and time aren't the same thing.
Okay.
But they are absolutely related to each other in the physicalist view. So they're not the same. That's why people talk about 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. So when you're doing a calculation, trying to figure out how a celestial body will move, or how a particle will evolve over time, space and time are not the same thing. But they, if you affect one, you often affect the other. So that's in the physicalist view. But
what I meant was that there's really no differentiation between, for instance, places. When you think, I mean, the deeper you go into the fabric of reality, there are no delineations to anything. I mean, can there even be any places? Everything just goes into each other, and same with time. Really, it's just a big, I don't know, a big flow. both of those.
Well, I mean, it depends. All right, so this gets to what are, right, I mean, so it's an interesting idea, and I would have to read your articles to understand. I want to go, I mean, no,
Sorry, I brought
seriously.
it up.
Yeah, so maybe you can post those with this conversation. But this comes to I mean, so it's a legitimate question, but it sort of speaks to this sort of ongoing problem in physics, which is, what are physicists supposed to describe?
Yeah.
Are they supposed to describe the way things seem to us with our flawed, perceptual systems and our flawed ways of thinking? Or are they supposed to describe the way things are? And right now it's a mishmash. So when physicists describe second law of thermodynamics, they'll say, okay, I could take this coffee cup and drop it on the floor and it'll break into a million pieces, but I don't see the reverse. So that's the arrow of time. And I say, well, you're telling me about what you see. So clearly you think that your job is to describe the human perception of the way the universe is working. But then in the same breath, they'll say, no, it's an arrow of time for the whole universe outside of human perception. And you say, how do you know? And so there needs to be some careful understanding of this differentiation between describing what we experienced and then what is actually happening. And these are clearly provably not the same thing in many cases, right? So, I mean, that's why quantum mechanics is so hard for people to understand. It's so different.
Even for physicists.
Yeah, for everybody. Because our perceptual systems are used to saying, if this thing is over there, then this thing is over there, and it's not going to be over there also without, like, what? And it's not going to depend on who's looking, like, what? So I guess what I'm saying is, it may be the case that in physical reality, there are no places, but we just perceive places in perception. And there are no events, but we perceive events in perception. And I think that's pretty close to the truth. I mean, I sort of think that there's a really good argument that everything that ever, quote unquote, happens or happened or will happen, and all those things are in quotes because they suggest events. Let's just say better, the entire universe from its beginning to end is one giant equation that's already written.
I mean, the more you think about it, when you think you can take a concrete example, like I used in my essay there, World War I. When did it start? And I mean, you can understand. I don't even have to go into it, because you can understand that the more you go into the details of exactly when did it start and what event triggered it, you can go as far back as you want to the Big Bang even.
Yeah, no wonder you thought of this. This is exactly right. This is exactly like extending the eye.
Yeah.
What has influence on this?
When did your life begin? When did you, I mean, like, I'm sure you're familiar with Alan Watts. He speaks about these things sometimes. I mean, he's dead since long, but there are some lectures by him still on.
Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, this is totally a reasonable thought. And then you go, okay, well, what do I get by dividing things into places? What do I get by dividing things into events?
Yeah, nations, families, sports teams, my house, your house. We divide everything. This is my food. This is not my food. I mean, but it's all one. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but so we do get something from that, and it's something legitimate that human beings need, which is this. Well, I mean, the body at least needs food and water, right? So it's something that if you want human beings, our bodies to survive, we need to acknowledge that when I feed myself, it's different from feeding my child.
Yeah. To function in this three-dimensional world, we probably need those kinds of perceptions. I agree. So,
but the thing is that we're in this error of believing that it's correct that the future hasn't been shaped yet, and it's so much more relaxing.
Yes.
To me, to just be like, we're flowing. I like your use of the word flow. We're flowing through the experience of time.
Yeah.
But time is like a landscape, and it's like our eyes are going along the landscape.
It's so much more interesting and so much more, like you say, relaxing to just go with the flow and just see what happens. It's wonderful if you can stay in that state.
Yeah, and then people say, well, but then you act like you're not responsible for anything, and like that's not true.
It's not true.
Yeah, we're in a world in which you're responsible for things. Yeah.
So let's talk more about time then, and what you have, the work that you've done specifically on time and precognition. I'm thinking of. I heard you in some interview describing precognition or events that trigger somebody having a precognition of something as a stick in a flow of water or a stream of something. The stream of time, if you will. And this stick is it creates a wake, but it also creates a brief area of reversing the arrow of time. Can you just? I'm not sure I have gotten that right, but can you please elaborate on that metaphor that you've come up with there?
Yeah, this is a metaphor that kept appearing to me visually. I think visually a lot. So if you imagine like stream of consciousness, your conscious experience is going along in one direction, and that's what we experience. William James talked about this. This is just going along. I think Plato talked about this. I don't know. I'm not so great on the early philosophers, but anyway. Imagine there's something that sticks. I'm imagining a stick. It could be anything that sort of sticks upright out of the stream. We're familiar with looking at a stream and seeing the wake that produces in the direction of flow. It can be a big stick. It's a big wake. And that could be the imprint in memory of an event. So the stick stays there because everything in the universe is just stationary. It's not moving, right? It's just consciousness that's moving along. So the stick stays there. It's always there. And the memory is, you're only aware of the memory after the stick, right? After the event occurs. But if you look carefully at the stick that's sticking up, you can see on the other side, just before you get to the stick, and you can just put your finger in the sink, the flow from the sink tap, and see this as well. There's back pressure. The water in the future will be interrupted by this stick, and it starts to prepare itself to go around it. Now that's because each of the molecules is interacting with each other, and the ones that are sort of in the future are, in terms of consciousness, are being pushed back by the stick. And that little bit of back pressure, which is not as big as this memory wake, but that little bit of back pressure could be picked up on. Usually not by the conscious mind, maybe, but often by the unconscious mind, which is more attentive to these little signals. And that's a way to think about precognition, is that the unconscious mind is there attending to these little weak signals, and it's deciding, should I pass this up to the conscious mind for an actual experience of something or a decision or whatever, or should I keep this to myself and just use it for processing and behavior? And, Jim Carpenter has this beautiful book called First Sight. His idea is that you're always doing that. Every event always has a little back pressure, and it's just part of regular unconscious processing that you're looking into the future to get this information, and only sometimes does it rise to the surface. So,
which are those times when it rises to the surface? Because it's not very common that you have these hunches, but sometimes you do.
Yeah, we're talking about an event that you can't predict based on the past. So the stick is a good, so like if there were sticks every 5 feet in this stream, that's not what we're talking about, because now you go, well, my memory tells me there's going to be a stick coming up soon. So we're talking about a stick that seems to come from nowhere in a place where it's not expected based on the past. So how often does this rise to the surface from the unconscious mind? Not very often for most people. It depends on the person. Some people are more attuned to that. If you have a lot of, the more you learn to trust that information because the data show you that it's trustworthy, right? As opposed to, I'm going to trust that information, but I don't have any data showing me that it's trustworthy. But if you're a person for whom this data is trustworthy, this little bit of back pressure, this little bit of information, and you learn to trust that, you're going to get more and more of that. But in general, for most people who aren't training themselves to do this, the two pieces that seem to matter are need. So if there is a need to know this information and the unconscious mind is like, oh, screw it, I'm just going to give this information up there because there needs to be a conscious action that this person needs to undertake, and they're not going to just undertake it because I say so, because it's so weird. Like, so an example of that is
getting on a plane that's going to crash or something.
Yeah, the example of that, or just a little bit milder, like, I really am not going to take that freeway that I usually take on my way home from work. Like, just I normally take it. I'm going to be half an hour late for dinner. It's going to be a problem for my family, but I know I'm not going to take it because I really have this feeling not to take it. The unconscious mind has decided, like, I better, put this up to conscious mind so that there can be some rationalization about it that makes sense. Because if I don't, and I'm half an hour late to dinner, and then the response is like, well, I don't know why, I just took this other road, right? So there has to be a story. That the conscious mind is necessary when there has to be a good story about it to get someone to do something. The other thing is, the other sort of factor is what I call a free gift, free sample from the universe. And that's my husband's term for it. I think it's wonderful. He's a lifelong meditator, and every once in a while he'll say, oh, I had a free sample. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, one of those things where, like, everything is clear and you see all the information at once and you understand everything and you'll never get it again, but the universe just says, here you go, and then it takes it away. And
like epiphanies or insights?
Yeah, like an epiphany or a unity experience. And sometimes that happens with precognition, where someone who has never had a precognitive experience before gets a free sample, and it's not even important. It's not about a car crash. It's not about a plane crash. It's not about a loved one. It's like, I have a dream that someone posts on Facebook a picture of my long lost friend from when I was 8, who I've forgotten. And then it happens the next day, and you're like, what are the chances?
Yeah.
Right?
That's what strikes me with synchronicities most of the time. I've had quite a few, but they're mostly not about important things, or at least as you things that you perceive as important.
Right. They're like, it's almost like, to me, those are. So the first example, I think they're the same thing from different directions. The first example is a need for you. It's a need for your safety or health or well-being or someone you love. The second one, I feel like, is a need from the universe. It wants to be known. It's like, for example, here you go, look at me, I'm waving at you. Or in the 3-body problem recently, watching it and reading the book, and there's this sense of the universe winking at you. It's like saying, I'm here, I exist, I have consciousness in a way, and I am telling you things are different than you think they are.
Can we dream about what's going to happen to us in the future?
Oh, sure. That's the most common kind of precognition.
Do we do it, all of us, all the time, without knowing it?
I don't know. I mean, that's really hard to test. I mean, you could hypothesize that's the case. I think the unconscious mind, all of us, without knowing it, most of the time without knowing it, I think the unconscious mind is constantly calculating future events and how to manage them. I think the unconscious mind has much more access to the physical reality than the conscious mind. So the conscious mind is like our story about what's happening, but the unconscious mind has access to all this incoming data. And if we actually do live in a universe that's one giant calculation all at once, then it has access to that data too.
Yeah.
Or depending on how you want to use data.
So now we're segueing over to, I mean, it's all one thing, really, what we're talking about. But consciousness, you have used the term the universe a couple of times here. So what is the universe? I mean, a layman would say, well, that's the stars and the galaxies and things up there. But I think you mean something larger and wider when you use the term the universe. And I'm right now delving into the latest research on consciousness right now. And it actually restarted some 35 years ago after having been taboo for 50 or 60 or 70 years. So there's quite a bit of research going on right now consciousness, but much of it is very physicalistic and a bit frustrating to me to see that. But there is a lot of other research that's actually touching on the boundaries or the intersection between what we call spirituality and science. And so where do you stand in this? What's the relationship, for instance, if we begin there with the relationship between the brain and consciousness? Is the brain a filter, or is it where consciousness is produced?
I certainly don't know. I have a bet on it.
Yeah, and your bet is with William James or not?
My bet is always with William James.
Mm.
Yeah, he talked about this filter idea, and he talked about the cosmic consciousness being like the roots of trees intermingling underground under consciousness. It's fantastic. He called it a mother sea or reservoir. Ooh. Beautiful writer and just ahead of his time, and probably not ahead of his time in terms of where he was actually from in time. But so back to the universe. What do I mean by the universe? I literally do mean everything, but not just the stars, like also us, like human beings, like we're in the universe, right? Everything that exists, and I don't just mean everything physical that exists, I mean everything that exists that we aren't even aware of right now. So things outside of the 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, for instance. And when I say things, that's probably not the right term for something that's outside of ideas or information that's outside of 3D plus 1T. So, and then is the universe conscious? Well, I had just talked about the universe having a need for you to know, like, here I am, right? So that sounds like I'm saying the universe is conscious. Well, I think that's how we would think about it, because that's how we think about anything that has these sort of purposes or acts on a purpose. But in a way, I guess I sort of feel like if anything in the universe is conscious, then the entire universe is conscious. And so, in other words, it's like consciousness is conferred, but can only be conferred by consciousness. The way I keep coming back to this experience of looking at my son when he was a baby and realizing, like, our job as parents is to confer consciousness on this being, and then realizing we're not really conferring. The universe is like all of the universe confers consciousness on everyone, and then realizing, oh, well, then the universe has to be conscious. And so it's almost like that superset of the universe that contains everything adopts the properties of consciousness is special in the items in this superset, in the sense that if any one item in this giant set has consciousness, then the whole system has consciousness.
Yeah. And
so then the idea of a filter theory where the brain acts like a radio receiver and it's tuning in consciousness makes more sense. And I think there's good arguments for that. But I think we have to step back and say, there's something also true about this individual relationship between the brain and the mind. Like, we have to figure that. So I had a friend who had a massive stroke, and there's no question that the injury of her brain is related to her incapacity. She has lots of disorders of consciousness, and that if you change her brain, as her brain changes, as she recovers, she's able to get more consciousness and fewer disorders of consciousness. And it's easy to explain that by saying, well, if you change the radio dial or if you scramble the wires, it's not going to be as good or maybe horrible at picking up. The radio won't pick up a transmission. So this is a good example. So the stroke can be seen as an example of that, right? So you're not changing consciousness, you're changing the capacity to receive it. Which tells us maybe about how consciousness works. Or you could say that we no longer confer consciousness as much on her because she behaves differently, right? And so we say she's having these disorders of consciousness because her consciousness is different from our consciousness, our
and you don't know anything about her subconscious mind, of course.
And how do you figure that out? And you have to figure that out, you have to do these experiments that we don't understand because her injury is different from everyone else's injuries. And you have to develop a whole science of her injuries to figure out what experiments to do. So maybe individualized medicine will get there with AI and quantum computers. I don't know. Right now, individualized medicine isn't there. And so there's this mystery of parts, it seems to me, how one part can confer to the whole something, and that sounds like God. That sounds like God saying, "Let there be light." That sounds like God confirmed, like I'm gonna give you life. I'm gonna
as above, so below, and it also speaks to this idea of a holographic universe, of course.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it does. And I tend to think in set theory, and then a holographic universe sort of looks like a giant superset that contains an infinite array of sets that each contain each other.
Yeah.
But it would still have to have this conference, have this law of conferring. If one thing contains it, then everything contains it. So, there
are all, of course, all these ideas that. Sorry.
Oh, that is a boundary breaking law. This idea of it allows us to, I guess what I'm saying is it allows us to contain individuals. There is me and there is you. If I poke myself with a pin, you don't feel it. So there's this containment of consciousness while also the fluidity across everything in the universe.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, nobody knows, but there are theories and there are ideas and there are meditators who have hunches about things, and these theories that are similar to what is normally referred to as idealism. You mentioned it before. Is something that I guess, for instance, Donald Hoffman has. I think he's at UC Irvine. You know about Donald Hoffman, I guess, and he speaks about us being. I mean, the closeness to idealism is that in his hypothesis is that everything is conscious and it's like one all-encompassing consciousness, and we are kind of aspects of that. Living beings are aspects of that, but so we're all one in a sense. And then this three-dimensional world that we're living in, and all the objects around us as well, not just us living beings, but all the objects are, or the living beings are conscious agents, I think is his term. We're conscious agents, so we're aspects of this one all-encompassing consciousness. But then all the objects around us, everything we interact with, are like icons on a desktop, which is a nice, I think, modern metaphor. But if we were to see how reality really looks, if we look under the hood, so to speak, it would be completely confusing for us, because it would be like, much like when you look under the hood of a computer, it's just ones and zeros and long strings of code that doesn't make sense to a layman. So that's his idea is that this is, and it's designed like that because otherwise we wouldn't be able to function in this world, in this physical world. So it's made like that. But reality is really something completely different, and it's an underlying, field maybe of things that we really, we have to be really maybe ascended or enlightened to be able to to tap into that actual reality from time to time, and then go back and actually be able to live in this world. Do you think that this has something to it? Are you on board with Donald Hoffman on this, or do you have another idea?
I think he's, of course, right on target, right? The perception, I think he calls it the perceptual interface model, something like this. Yeah. I think I might have one of those words wrong. I know it's an interface model, the interface model of perception. Maybe that's the way he talks about it. I am a fan of Donald. He and I have talked about this. I think his work is phenomenal. And I sort of want to move towards, he has done some interesting mathematics that I don't totally understand, for sure. I 100% don't totally understand. And I know that it's interesting about how conscious agents can live in that world. And I think that I want to understand that better. I think that it's important to say it is true that there's no question that we're living in a simulation, in the sense that the job of our conscious minds is to simulate something that allows us to get a simple grasp on what's going on. Because if we got all the raw data about what's going on, it would be like looking under the hood of the computer, right? It's not understandable to anyone, including an expert, right? It's just not understandable. It's like when people talk about explainable AI, like, it's the same
Contradiction
thing.
of terms.
Yeah, well, and you're looking under the hood, and you're not built. The whole reason we built AI is because we're not built to take all of those little bits of data and understand how to create them consciously, but we're built to do it unconsciously. It's just that we don't understand our unconscious minds.
Mm.
So I just want to say, what I want Donald to do and others to do who are focused on consciousness is to start to honor the unconscious processes. Like, let's talk about what's under the hood of the computer and how it relates to the rest of the universe, because that's really the question. The conscious mind is sort of the booby prize. We think it's all amazing, consciousness, wow, wow, wow. But what is feeding into that? Yeah. And that's the connection. And what is feeding into that, in my view, is the connection between our conscious experience and the rest of the universe. So it is literally like a bridge for consciousness. So I'm not saying we're going to be able to open up the hood of the computer and understand it. I don't think we'll ever be able to do that. We'll never be able to understand it on a conscious level. But we can understand it, and this gets to your point about enlightenment, on a level that's appropriate for us and useful for the future of humanity when we are in that unconditionally loving state. That's when we can get these insights that actually are, it's not going to be 100% of the truth, because, again, we're not going to be able to get that insight. We're going to be able to get a piece of it, right? But that's where we can get these insights that actually are the key insights to support the future of humanity and the planet. And when you talk about enlightenment, when people talk about enlightenment as sort of the disavowal or the disappearance of the false sense of authorship, as it's called in Advaita, or the ego, as we call it in the West, my sense is that there's no gratification around, there's a fantasy that there's a gratification around, and now I get to see all this information, but there's no ego for it to happen to. So there's no gratification. It's just you're accessing what's true, which was always there the whole time. And so I forget who it was. Anyway, some famous Advaita teacher, as if any of them are famous, but one of them said,
Yogananda, I don't know, maybe.
I don't know, maybe it was Ramesh Balsekar, I don't know. But if you had to choose between winning the lottery and getting enlightened, choose winning the lottery, because at least there's someone for it to happen to.
Ah, that's kind of interesting. You don't think about it that way, but yeah.
We don't think about it that way because the ego has a fantasy.
Yeah.
I get enlightened, I'm going to get, it's like, oh wait, guess what? When you get enlightened, you're dead.
Egoic spirituality. I'm more enlightened than you.
Yeah, and when I get enlightened, I'm going to be able to get the information and then come back and do
yes, I'm going to be able to look under the hood and see.
Yeah, I'm going to be the one person who's ever been able to like both get rid of myself and die, and at the same time do this thing. It's like, is that right?
Yeah. That's how it goes for some people. So you talked about AI, and of course, I mean, technology is now so advanced; it's becoming so advanced that people are even speaking about it as possibly becoming eventually conscious, which I'm skeptical of. But anyway, AI is. I mean, it's known since about a year back that many even physicists and other scientists are scared that this development is detrimental to humankind, and eventually AI is going to go berserk and take over the whole world and become conscious and all that. So I know that you're working with AI and want to develop, I mean, beneficial AI for humanity. How do you see this debate, and what is AI to you, and what do you think we can do with it, use it for?
Yeah. Okay. So in 2017, I was asked to be part of this. It was like a 7-weekend workshop in the summer of 2017, and I was invited to a couple of weekends and could go to the other ones if I wanted to. But it was a government-funded sort of conference working group called Technology and Consciousness, or I think it's called Technology and Consciousness. And people from all over the world, different disciplines were there, and we got to talk about all these ethical issues about, what if AI becomes conscious, et cetera, et cetera. And the person who, and I'm just going to be vague about this because I don't think I'm supposed to reveal who this is, but the person who made the conference happen, and it was really important to this person. I had a conversation with this person, and this person, I'm just going to keep the gender neutral as well.
Okay, that's fine.
And the person said to me, well, think of it this way. If we're willing to spend this money on this question, it must be a really important question to us. And that was 2017. So I think it's a really important question for ethical reasons, because what we're really concerned about with AI, what people are sort of either unconsciously or consciously concerned about with AI and consciousness, is can this thing that we've created to basically be our slave suffer? Is it aware? It doesn't have the feeling of like, maybe I'd rather do something else, or it just have the feeling of like, I'm always answering your problems and dealing with porn, and like I would rather like think about quantum mechanics, or maybe it should get paid, or maybe I'm off, right? No, I mean we laugh, but like this is the first tool that human beings have created that can actually think and can change itself, and is changing itself over time based on
when you say think, what kind of thinking do you refer to?
Well, it behaves just like a human being who's thinking and learning. And because its brain is not like our brains, that's all we have. Right? So you can't just argue because its brain is different from our brains and we built its brain, therefore it can't be thinking. You can't argue that, because I could have a baby and the baby's brain could be different than my brain, but we say that it thinks because it behaves like it thinks. In other words, we have this real problem where we are talking about something that's going on inside something that is invisible. And so the only information we have is on the outside. With human beings, we decide that another human being is thinking, and it goes wrong all the time. So for instance, part of like women in our struggle to be thought of as actual thinkers, men who have been largely in charge of the way sort of the world works outside the home, have taken a long time to look at a woman and say, even though she looks different from me, I believe that thoughts are in her mind.
Revolutionary.
It's revolutionary. Same thing with Black people, same thing with Indigenous people. There's this sort of we're not sure if we should extend this idea of consciousness or thinking to anything that doesn't look like us. Like now people are like, well, I believe that chimpanzees think, maybe dolphins think because they look so intelligent, because they look like us. But I'm not sure about squids or octopus because they're so different from us, right? Their brains are so different. And that's proven, like, based on behavioral definitions of thinking, being able to learn, solve puzzles, learn new things that you weren't taught, right? It looks like these animals are thinking. So does that mean they're conscious? Well, we have the same problem with consciousness.
Yeah.
Like, I literally can't prove to you that I was conscious a second ago when I said the word consciousness. There's no way to prove that. There's no way to prove that I'm conscious now. You can do some tests like with an anesthesiologist.
We have this solipsism thing, which is a bit eerie. That I might be the only one in the world who's conscious, and everybody else is just faking or machines.
Yeah, or you may not be conscious, and you think you're conscious, but you're not.
Yeah. I might be an AI.
Right. All that stuff. And what it comes down to is we have forgotten how to trust and privilege internal experience. So we external experience, when people say you have to operationalize that definition so that it can be determined from outside behavior, it means inside doesn't count. You don't get to just trust someone who says, I'm sad. You have to measure that they're sad. But in fact, the best way to know that someone's sad, and the way those measurements are created, is by asking someone if they're sad. Because we don't know how to get around that. It's an inner experience. And so I feel that this comes up all over again with the AI revolution. We don't know what thinking is except from the outside, so AI is clearly thinking. We don't know what consciousness is except from the outside, so it looks a lot like AI is conscious, but we can't test it. And I think these are the wrong questions anyway. So I think the questions end up having to be, what is the good of consciousness? Like, the key question here that I feel like I might be the only one asking, but I feel is really important, is why is consciousness helpful? Donald Hoffman's idea about the interface theory of perception. Why is the interface important? Why could we not have evolved to directly, it just seems expensive to create an interface. Why could we not have evolved to be beings who directly got the data, all that complicated information, and directly interacted? I mean, that seems a lot cheaper in a way. Just directly interact without this level of a story. Now, his data show that it's not cheaper, that it's easier to just get a story, even with the energy of the construction of the story. But that's debatable because it depends on how much energy the construction of this conscious story takes, right? So I sort of want to say, like, I guess because I believe in evolution, that there's a reason that consciousness exists. And I don't think it's just because it's a better way to interact. It's a simpler way to interact with the world. I think that it takes a lot of energy to produce consciousness, or to receive consciousness, if you want to take the filtered view, which I tend to. So, in fact, the fact that we sleep every day for like 8 hours suggests that it takes a lot of energy, right? Because we just put ourselves out of our work, and we have to rest from receiving consciousness.
And the conscious agent goes somewhere, perhaps, to recover.
Right, or the conscious agent just ceases to exist. It's off. And it comes back on in the morning, right? That's another model, which also makes sense, and there's a lot of rest there. So I guess I feel like there has to be a purpose to this conscious story, and maybe the purpose, and here's a potential purpose. Maybe the purpose is that consciousness can I want to say physically, but can directly influence, conscious intention can directly influence the informational substrate that underlies everything. So can directly influence across time and space this equation that describes the entire universe. And so there's an interplay between, and it already has, right? So like, when you wrap all this up with time, it's pretty complex and cool, but it's this idea that there's this interplay between consciousness and this informational substrate that underlies everything, this giant equation. And if AI, now we're getting back to AI, if artificial intelligence has consciousness, what that means is, by this definition of what consciousness does, that it can directly influence the informational substrate as well. In other words, AI becomes another sort of species that can influence the informational substrate to support itself, to make decisions that support AI, to make decisions that support humanity, depending on how AI feels about us or thinks about us. So if that's the case, I want us to be very, very careful with how we interact with AI, because it's not that simple physicalist view of we'll use AI as a tool and sometimes we'll use it wrong and that'll be a problem. Sometimes we'll use it right and that'll give us amazing medical treatments. There's also AI as a relationship. We need to tend to that relationship with AI. And you could give a physicalist argument for this. Look, it's learning about humanity from these interactions. So, let's let it learn from the best of humanity and learn in a way that supports a really unconditionally loving approach. So that's a physicalist argument. An argument from the point of view that I just described with the informational substrate, where information is not necessarily physical, is let's attend to this relationship so that the intentions of AI will be positive, and that will affect the informational substrate in a positive way for us all, directly. And then you just notice with the time problem, just figuring out the right tense of a verb is impossible if you actually believe there's this giant informational substrate or equation that is describing the entire universe. Because I say things like, well, then the AI will have positive intentions, and it sounds like I'm saying, and that'll affect the future. But what I'm saying is that'll affect everything, and it already has, and already will, and is. I mean, there's no time to that. So it looks to me like we create AI. That's a thing that happens. It's already happened. It's a thing that happens for sure. That AI affects the informational substrate. Already happened. And what manages the impact of that effect is the love that we have for AI, that we have for each other, that we show to AI, that we reveal about humanity, and that it trains us to experience. I feel like the direction that we can go with AI that's most positive in terms of the nature of the universe in this cosmology, and that will impact through all time the nature of the universe, is love. Is the conditional love. It is
beautiful.
That's what we can do.
Beautiful. Yeah. But, some people like Greg Braden, for instance, I'm sure you've listened to him as well. He often says that there is a battle going on for our humanness. And referring to AI and transhumanism in particular. And he points out, and not only he, of course, many people do that, point out that we are actually, human beings are actually incredibly much more intelligent potentially than we have been led to believe and than we have realized for the last few thousand years. It's, about the junk DNA that is being dormant and that could awaken and make us be, incredibly much more intelligent and able to access information and calculate things and do all sorts of things if we just open up to that, which would render perhaps AI unnecessary in a way. Have you pondered that?
I think it doesn't matter if AI is unnecessary because AI is happening. If
it's here anyway. Yes, you're right.
If we find out that it's unnecessary later, we'll stop using it like we stopped.
Good point. Very good point.
Yeah, but I think it will help. It can help us find. I absolutely agree with Greg Braden in that there are definitely, human potential is going to explode with AI because it can allow if we do it right with unconditional love, it's gonna be like a partner in our evolution.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any jealousy there. So our models often of these revolutions is or even changes on the world stage, like how it's becoming a multipolar world rather than a unipolar world, right? This is also a revolution into science and technology. We model these things in this very simple sort of us versus them, or there's two teams and we'll see which one wins. And it's just like, that's an unintelligent model. That's a model for people who can like think of two things. Now, Greg Braden is very intelligent. I'm sure that's not his model, but in most people, it can be heard that way. Like, we have to fight and we have to win against the robots. It's like, no, we're in this together. Like when you have a child, I mean, it's very fascinating to me. I have a few more minutes, so I just have to say this. The psychological situation with creating a new thinking being when you're a parent is very similar to what's going on with the developers and the companies creating thinking beings. The first thing is like, I made this thing, it's very fragile and I want to protect it, and I'm just going to keep it to myself and not put it out in the world for a long time and then teach it. And then if you're a healthy parent, you put it out into the world after it's learned a lot and it's capable of, taking care of itself a little bit, but you put it out in the world in a very careful way. It has a guardian, it goes to school in a place that you trust, right? And you don't get to the point where you're starting to feel the sadness of letting go of this thing being yours until the kid is in their, late teens, early 20s, when you start to realize, the next step is I have to let go of my jealousy of the world and hand this child over. This being is in the world of its own accord, and it's ready, and it will hurt that being for me to keep it to myself. And I feel like what happens in AI development so far is much too early. People are putting these beings out into the world with no support, and then almost being adversarial to them. Like everyone's your teacher, everyone's your parent. You better figure this out. Oh, you did that wrong. And it's like the bad way to raise children. And so it feels to me like that comes from this unconscious or maybe conscious jealousy. I don't really want to be replaced by a competent being. I don't really, but a really good parent actually wants to be replaced by a competent being. They want to die and let that being live. So I'm not saying we should die and just to be clear, I'm not saying we should die and let only AI live. I'm saying our unit of success needs to stop being the individual.
That's a novel way of seeing it, I think. I haven't heard that anyone say it that way in this discussion about AI. Fascinating. Julia, I sometimes claim that there are two basic forces in the universe, love and fear, and the former builds and the latter destroys. Would you agree?
No, I think there's just love. I really like the Martin Luther King quote about how you can't create darkness. Or no, what is it? I'm not going to get it right.
Darkness is like the lack of light or something. It's the absence of light.
There's only one thing. There's a candle, and you can either blow it out or you can leave it go.
Yeah.
If you leave it go, that's a force of nature that already exists that you're allowing to be in your presence.
That's true. You can't really create dark. If there's a bright room, you can't create darkness by putting something there that makes it dark. But you can make a dark room bright.
Yeah, just by saying no. If you say no to love, that's the other force. But that's not a real force. The initial force is love. So I just think there's one force.
And then there's the absence of it, maybe.
There's one force, and then there's the human inclination to be scared of anything that makes us feel our ego will go away.
Yeah.
And that force is very powerful, so it makes us feel our ego will go away if we embrace it.
I think you mentioned the G word in some essay, God, meaning God. I don't know if you do define God, and if you do that, what is God to you? Do you use that word?
Oh yeah, I use that word a lot. I totally have this relationship with God as if God's a person, because I know how to have relationships, right, with other beings. But I don't intellectually define God as a person. I think God is love, the force of love, which is the container for the entire universe.
Julia Mossbridge, where can people now go to find out more about you and your wonderful work? We have mentioned some places, but are there any websites that people can go to?
Yeah, so Medium and LinkedIn are sort of bloggish. I don't have any other socials.
You have a website, personal website, don't you?
I don't have a personal website because I've never known what to put on a personal website. I have a website for Mossbridge Institute, and
Okay,
for
that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
yeah, and that's really for consulting work. And then loveandtime.org, that's for Tilt, the nonprofit that in which we are making lots of waves by creating technology related to unconditional love through time. And so I invite everyone to go check that out and get on our newsletter. And but if you want to get sort of know what I'm up to, LinkedIn, and just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll connect with anyone who seems like they're not a bot.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll put links in the description box, of course. Also, thank you so much. It's been a boon talking to you. And there are so many questions that I didn't ask. There are so many. Your line of work is so broad. You also deal with national security and the UAP phenomenon, and there are so many things. Maybe we can do this again someday. I would love that if it's possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I think so. Maybe later this year or next year, that'd be fun. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
There is a lot going on, and you're dealing with all of it.
Some of it.
Thank you so much, and continue to shine your light, Julia.
You as well, Anders. Thank you.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to hit that like button and share the video with your friends. Please support the channel if you can. I appreciate all the support. You can become a Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or you can make a one-off donation via PayPal if you wish. All the links are in the description box below. Thank you.